Hey everyone. Today we're going to dive into a series that really kind of shows what the Uniswap v2 TWAP is, how we can create this as an oracle in our smart contracts using Chainlink and Chainlink automation. So this will be the first video of a series. This will basically show you how we can init our project. We're going to be using Foundry, and we're also going to be using a beacon proxy pattern. So we'll be able to see how we can deploy upgradable versions of our contracts so that we can see down the line if we need to do any changes and others want to use this contract through the factory. We can create those changes as the admin, and which will reflect on everybody else. So let's start with initiating our Foundry repo. For anybody that doesn't know anything about Foundry, you can go to foundry.sh and install Foundry. So let's check number one if we have the newest version. So just through Foundry up, it will download all of the Foundry tools. That way we'll have our Forge, Cast, Anvil, and Chisel up to date. So cool. Now that we have that done, let's do a Forge init, and we'll call this the TWAP Oracle example. So that will create a new repository and a directory that we can go to. So let's code TWAP Oracle example and see what we have going on here. Let's create a new terminal window and come to our Foundry toml. So this is kind of the beginning of where we need to initiate any type of libraries that we'll be using in here that will point to the contracts that we have. So we will init that in a second. We also want to create a makefile, and this is where we'll be initiating a lot of our commands from. And I'll show you that in a second of which commands we'll start with. And then let's go over to our source. This is where our example contracts are. And we'll just delete all of this for right now since we won't need this. And we can call this the TWAP Oracle for now. Also delete this. Great. Same thing with test. We'll see that with Foundry. The best way to do this is really name your testing contracts either after your contract itself that you're creating, or another scheme that we can look at down the line with a following T. So in this case, let's just call this TWAP Oracle test, and we can delete all of this other stuff. We will keep the setup, and we can go over that later, why we want to keep that. But for now, we can get rid of all this other stuff. So the test is also inheriting, or the TWAP Oracle test is also inheriting the test contracts, which gives us a lot of helper functions, which we can go over the setup at a later video. Now that we have this done, we can kind of talk about what libraries that we want to import and how we do that and how Foundry does that as an example. So let's start off with figuring out which libraries that we want. So to initiate our contract, we're going to need, number one, Open Zeppelin contracts. So we'll do both the Open Zeppelin contracts repo and also the upgradable contracts. So let's bring those in first. We'll go into our Foundry toml and then create a new key called remappings. And what this is doing is basically just saying what are we calling them in our contract versus what we will have once we download the dependencies. So we'll do some copy and pasting of the ones that we need. So as of right now, we will copy and paste both the Open Zeppelin contracts and the upgradable. And again, this just points to what needs to be downloaded from their repositories themselves. And then also points to when this is downloaded in our library. Right now, this is just the testing, built-in testing libraries that come with Foundry, but these will also be downloaded. On top of that, we are going to need the Chainlink repo and also the Uniswap because we want to see some of the contracts from Uniswap as well. So let's add these as well. And cool. So now that we have both of these, we'll have the remappings. We'll also add, we can get rid of this. We can also add a future RPC endpoint because we are going to be fork testing later. We will add an RPC endpoint, and I'll show you how to do this as well. Basically, in our testing file, we'll reference the main net to this environment variable that we'll set up as well. This way that we can add our Infura or Alchemy endpoints so we can fork test. Cool. So now that we have this, let's create our makefile. So our makefile is going to add a couple of commands. We'll have one setup command, and what the setup command is really just at the start. So it's an init install where it will forge install the libraries that we want. So in this case, we want the Open Zeppelin, we want the upgradable Open Zeppelin, the Chainlink smart contract repo, and the Uniswap v2 periphery and the core, and then also the Solidity lib. So all of these are different repos that Uniswap controls, and we want to download all of these as dependencies in our library so we can reference them in the future. So now that we have this saved, we can do number one, with Foundry, if you have any current changes in Git, you will need to stage those changes before you can actually install anything, and I'll explain this into a second. But just as a reference, you will need to do that. So let's first see that we can have everything staged. So right now, nothing's staged. Good. We'll do a git add and a git commit, and we'll call this init dependencies. Cool. So now that we have that, let's do a make init install, which will start cloning those repos and installing the dependencies that we need. What Foundry does is, instead of a traditional JavaScript, or if you're familiar with using Hardhat with node modules, this will create a Git modules. So similar but different from node modules, where Git modules will actually create a Git modules or a .git modules file, which is basically creating a bunch of submodules. And you can do some research on what submodules are, but at a high level, what's happening is we are creating a path and a URL and also a version. So in this case, we look at the ones that are downloaded, and it created submodules instead of physically creating the actual or downloading the actual whole libraries. It's basically like a pointer. So in this case, we'll have a pointer to this submodule and so forth. And so now that that's done, we can see that all of our dependencies are in our lib folder, and we can also, let's rename these as well. This will be TWAP Oracle, and let's name this. And don't forget to add the T, so if you test these and it doesn't have a T, it will not test these. So just remember that. Oracle.t. cool. So before we end this video, let's make a couple more makefile commands. Now that we've done the init, we don't need to do this init ever again unless we do a full clean. So now that we have a git modules file, we won't have to do this git init install. But in the case that somebody wants to pull your repo and use it as well, you should have a install command, which will literally just do that, a forge install, and this forge install points to the git modules. So you don't need to do another init install with all of this unless something changes and you need to, but you just need to do a regular install for the forge install pointing to the git modules. And that should be everything. We're not going to add any of the testing commands yet, but we can add a clean command. And so what this clean command will do is, just in case you want to do a full clean of your git modules and start over, we can do a clean which will basically remove the directories. So do a remove recursive force on all the git modules and basically create new modules and actually do a commit to Git so that this is in Git history as well. So next video we'll dive into how we're going to start the contracts and then kind of go over at a high level of what TWAP oracles are doing and why you'd want to use them in your contract.